In the basement of the 14th Naval District Building at Pearl Harbor, Lieutenant Commander Joseph Rochefort hunched over his desk, surrounded by towers of intercepted Japanese messages. It was late April 1942, and the cryptanalyst hadn't seen his family in weeks. His uniform wrinkled, eyes bloodshot, but his mind razor-sharp. Something massive was coming. He could feel it in the patterns of enemy communications, radio traffic that flowed through Station Hypo like a river threatening to burst its banks. Outside his windowless office, the Pacific Fleet remained a shadow of its former self. 4 battleships lay on the harbor bottom, hundreds of aircraft destroyed. More than 2,000 Americans died. The Japanese had struck with devastating precision, leaving America's Pacific defenses in ruins. But Rochefort knew something the enemy didn't. The Americans weren't beaten. They were learning, adapting, preparing to strike back. "Sir, another intercept from the Japanese Fourth Fleet," announced a cryptanalyst, placing a freshly decoded message on Rochefort's cluttered desk. "They're requesting additional supplies for something called Operation MI." Rochefort's tired eyes blazed with intensity. For weeks, his team had tracked fragments of a massive Japanese operation. The coded designation AF appeared repeatedly, taunting them with its mystery. If they could crack this puzzle, they might turn the tide of the entire war. Admiral Chester Nimitz stood at his headquarters window, watching salvage crews still working to raise the sunken battleships. The white-haired Texan had inherited a demoralized force at its darkest hour, facing an enemy that seemed unstoppable. His intelligence officer, Commander Edwin Layton, approached nervously. "Admiral Rochefort's team believes they've identified a pattern. Something major is planned for early June, their largest operation since the war began." Unlike many senior commanders who dismissed code-breaking as unreliable guesswork, Nimitz understood that information was the most powerful weapon in modern warfare. "How certain are they?" he asked, his voice carrying the weight of command. "Every decision meaning life or death for thousands." "Rochefort stakes his career on it, sir," Layton replied. "He believes the target is somewhere in the Central Pacific, down in the cryptanalysis center." Rochefort's team worked with feverish intensity. The basement room was thick with cigarette smoke and stale coffee. IBM tabulating machines clattered endlessly, sorting through thousands of code groups. Lieutenant Commander Wesley Wright made the crucial connection. "The Japanese keep referencing water desalination equipment for AF. Why would they need special water supplies for a major naval base?" The pieces clicked into place for Rochefort. A location needing additional water supplies, somewhere strategically vital enough to warrant a massive operation. His mind raced through possibilities before settling on the answer: Midway, the tiny American outpost guarding the approaches to Hawaii. Lieutenant Commander Jasper Holmes proposed an ingenious verification plan. "What if we have Midway report water supply problems? If the Japanese mention it in their coded traffic, we'll know AF is Midway." Within hours, Midway sent an emergency message in plain language about water distillation plant failures. The Japanese took the bait. Their intelligence reported AF was experiencing water shortages. The target was confirmed: Midway. Meanwhile, Admiral William Bull Halsey lay in Enterprise's sickbay, his body ravaged by severe dermatitis. The aggressive commander, who had led early carrier raids, was too ill to stand, let alone command the most important battle of the war. Admiral Raymond Spruance visited his old friend, two men, opposites in temperament but united in determination. "Ray, I'm giving you my command," Halsey said weakly. "Take my boys and hit those bastards hard." Nimitz faced a daunting challenge. The Japanese carriers Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu were veterans of Pearl Harbor with the world's best pilots. Against them, he had Enterprise, Hornet, and the battle-damaged Yorktown, barely returned from the Coral Sea. When asked how long to repair Yorktown, his maintenance officer replied, "3 months minimum, Admiral. She took bomb hits deep into her structure." "You have 3 days," Nimitz said flatly. "Whatever it takes. I want that ship operational." The officer's jaw dropped, but he saw the determination in Nimitz's eyes. What followed was superhuman effort, 1,400 workers swarming over Yorktown, welding and hammering around the clock. Repairs that should have taken months were compressed into 72 hours of desperate activity. On Midway itself, Marine Colonel Harold Shannon inspected his ragtag aircraft collection. Obsolete Brewster Buffalo fighters, nicknamed Flying Coffins, alongside a few newer Wildcats and various bombers. His pilots were mostly green, fresh from training. "Colonel, are we really expected to stop the Japanese Navy with these?" asked Major Lofton Henderson. "We'll stop them or die trying," Shannon replied grimly. "Every minute we delay them gives the Navy a better chance." As dawn approached on June 4th, 1942, the stage was set for one of history's most decisive naval battles. The Japanese came with supreme confidence, expecting to catch the Americans by surprise. Instead, they sailed into a carefully prepared trap. At 0430 hours, Lieutenant Commander Joichi Tominaga led 108 Japanese aircraft toward Midway. As they formed up in pre-dawn darkness, not one suspected that American carriers lurked nearby, waiting. On Midway, radar operators detected the incoming strike at 0552. Air raid sirens wailed across the tiny atoll. Marines ran to battle stations, while pilots sprinted to aircraft. Every flyable plane had to get airborne or risk destruction on the ground. Major Henderson led his obsolete Buffaloes into the dawn sky, knowing they faced massacre against superior Zeros. The Marine sacrifice wasn't in vain. Their desperate attack disrupted Japanese formations and bought precious time for Midway's bombers to escape toward the Japanese fleet. Aboard the Japanese carrier Akagi, Admiral Nagumo faced a fateful dilemma. He had held back 93 aircraft, armed with anti-ship weapons in case American ships appeared. Should he rearm them for a second strike on Midway? At 0715, Nagumo made his crucial decision: rearm the aircraft with bombs for land attack. Crews began the dangerous process of removing torpedoes and replacing them with conventional bombs on crowded hangar decks. Unknown to Nagumo, American carriers were already launching their strikes. Admiral Spruance had made the crucial decision to launch everything at maximum range, a calculated risk that would catch the Japanese at their most vulnerable moment. Lieutenant Commander John Waldron led Hornet's Torpedo Squadron 8, knowing the odds against his slow, vulnerable devastators. He had been brutally honest with his men. "If only one of us makes it through, he'll hit a carrier. May God be with us all." At 0920, Waldron spotted the Japanese fleet through cloud breaks. His torpedo squadron was alone, separated from fighters and dive bombers. Attacking without cover was suicide, but this might be their only chance. "Attack immediately," Waldron ordered, leading 15 Devastators toward the carriers. The Zeros were waiting. As the torpedo bombers lumbered toward their targets at wave-top height, Japanese fighters attacked ferociously, one by one. Devastators burst into flames and crashed into the sea. Ensign George Gay watched in horror as squadron mates died around him. Waldron's plane cartwheeled into the ocean. Others exploded in midair. Gay pressed on alone, releasing his torpedo at Carrier Soryu before his plane was riddled with bullets and crashed. Torpedo Squadron 8 was annihilated. All 15 planes shot down, only George Gay surviving. Their torpedoes missed or failed to explode, but their sacrifice wasn't in vain. The attack pulled Japanese fighter cover down to sea level, leaving high altitudes undefended. By 10:20, Japanese carriers were in chaos, returning aircraft circling overhead low on fuel, flight decks crammed with planes being refueled and rearmed, ordnance scattered everywhere. It was at this moment of maximum vulnerability that Commander Wade McCluskey arrived overhead with 33 dive bombers from Enterprise. He had led an exhausting search beyond safe fuel range, but his perseverance paid off. At 10:22, through cloud breaks, he saw Japanese carriers spread below, their flight decks packed with aircraft. No Zeros challenged him at altitude. They were all at sea level, finishing off torpedo bombers. McCluskey split his force and gave the order millions of Americans had waited for since Pearl Harbor. Attack immediately. Lieutenant Dick Best led his squadron toward Akagi, Nagumo's flagship. Pushing over into his dive, Best kept his eye on the growing carrier shape. At 2,500 feet, he released his 1,000-pound bomb and pulled out sharply. Best's bomb was perfectly placed, punching through Akagi's flight deck and exploding among fueled aircraft. The result was catastrophic. Secondary explosions rippled through the ship as fuel and ordnance detonated in chain reactions. Simultaneously, Kaga was hit by 4 bombs, starting uncontrollable fires. Lieutenant Commander Max Leslie's dive bombers from Yorktown scored 3 direct hits on Soryu. Within 6 minutes, 3 of Japan's premier carriers were burning wrecks from his hiding place in the water. George Gay watched the carriers that had seemed invincible moments before become funeral pyres. The bodies of his squadron mates floated nearby, but their sacrifice had made this moment possible. Admiral Nagumo, forced to transfer his flag from burning Akagi to a cruiser, was in shock. 3/4 of his striking power was eliminated in minutes. Only Hiryu remained operational, racing northwest while launching a counterstrike that would damage Yorktown before dive bombers from Enterprise found and destroyed the last Japanese carrier. As darkness fell on June 4th, American pilots returned with fuel tanks nearly empty. Many aircraft ditched in darkening seas as destroyers raced to rescue pilots. The human cost had been high, but strategic victory was complete. Japan lost 4 fleet carriers, 1 heavy cruiser, 248 aircraft, and 3,057 men, including irreplaceable experienced pilots. Americans lost 1 carrier, 1 destroyer, 147 aircraft, and 362 men. The Battle of Midway became more than a tactical victory. It was the turning point where apparent weakness transformed into strength through intelligence and determination. The code breakers who made victory possible, the torpedo bomber crews whose sacrifice created opportunity, the dive bomber pilots who delivered the decisive blow, all contributed to a triumph that proved democracies could fight and win against totalitarian enemies. Today, Midway Atoll is a wildlife refuge, its runways abandoned and facilities crumbling. But the waters around it remain hallowed ground where brave men from both nations fought and died in a battle that shaped our world. Their sacrifice reminds us that freedom requires vigilance, intelligence, and preparation can overcome seemingly insurmountable odds, and ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things when their nation's survival is at stake. A lesson learned in those Pacific waters on June 4th, 1942, remains as relevant today as it was on that fateful morning, that the values of democracy and freedom, defended by courage and sacrifice, can prevail against any odds,